Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have with us Linda Knipe. She is a retired high school counselor, author, Master of Education, and Certificate of Advanced Study in Counselor Education. And we learn from her about her personal journey through PTSD and depression, life changing lessons she learned on the path to healing, and we'll be learning so many other things from her. Welcome to the show, Linda.
Oh, hi, AJ. Thank you so much for having me.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show, Linda. Welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. Talk about facing trauma, rewriting inner dialogue, and finding real healing. We'll talk all about this in this backdrop. We'll have our conversation. But before that, let's understand a bit about your journey, your background, Linda, so that people know who they are listening to.
I've uh, been around a long time. I've done a lot of things, and I've always worked in human services. But I got into counselor education working in the schools because it seemed to be the best way to really help people is to get them early. And when I went into my counselor education program, I was not quite 40. And in the end of my first class, I was triggered in a discussion about therapy for rape. And I had been raped when I was in my mid-20s and had just moved on with life, as so many women do. And when we got talking about that, I was really, I felt like somebody had just thrown something at my face when they started talking about it. And I left the class and I started having all sorts of re-experiencing symptoms. For the next couple of weeks, I got to the point where I couldn't eat. I was not able to sleep. I was having a lot of re-experiencing feelings, and I just couldn't understand why I couldn't control my own thoughts anymore. So I finally went back to my professor and asked him what was going on, and he explained to me about PTSD, which was not something we'd learned about yet in my first course. And I finally realized that in order to handle it, I was going to have to seek therapy. So that's what I did. So I wrote this book. It's 20 years down the road, but that was the hardest experience I ever went through in my life. It lasted quite a while because I was having marriage problems and was overstressed with too much work and school. So I learned a lot through that time. My perspectives shifted. I learned how therapy worked. I became a better counselor because of it. And at this point of my life, when I'm able to sit down and write, it's a huge lesson that I felt I needed to pass on. And so that is why I wrote the book. The book's called Breathing Therapy, and that is really what it felt like.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Linda. We'll come to the book part also. We'll separately have a talk on that. But first, I want to understand, how did you manage to come out of that situation? You talked about and then move on with life. What struggle in? I want to understand how did you put everything back on the rails and get to this point in life.
I'll start right before that happened. I was my marriage was challenging. I was a mother of 3 young boys. I had gone back to school while I was working full time. So I was really overwhelmed with life anyway. But I had always managed by putting uncomfortable feelings, by burying them. Like I was strong, I was smart, and I wasn't going to let things get in my way. And so when something happened that was really difficult, I didn't necessarily work through things. I would shove it away. And the reason I say that is because as I'm talking to people now, that's the part that people connect to in the books, because a lot of people do that. The problem was when I got into the counselor ed program and realized I was going to have to be talking with other people about this, um, and realizing also during that class that I intellectualized a lot of things. I didn't allow my feelings to get in the way. And I kind of looked at other students who operated more on an emotional basis as, you know, that they were letting their emotions get in the way. I really intellectualized things, and I saw that finally as a real problem. So therapy was a journey, and it really took me 5 years because I had things that I was never going to talk about that I really stayed hidden. I was worried about my marriage falling apart, so I wouldn't talk about that. And finally, when I came out the other side and started to be a more emotional person and started to really think through even the uncomfortable stuff, I just got much healthier. I was much more self-aware. Um, and things did change in my life. My husband and I decided that we would be better parents and better friends if we weren't living together. And so we ended up separating, and we both went our own ways, but that left room for us each to be in very healthy, happy relationships. And so that's been my life for the last 20 years, is living in self-awareness, being being happy and being able to control um, the difficult parts of life. Because I think that's a big message that I have, is that life is difficult. It's supposed to be difficult because that's where we learn the most. And I learned a lot through that really difficult time. And the message is to not hide from it, to go through it, learn from it, and be more self-aware and better able to manage our own lives.
Absolutely, absolutely, Linda. So I want to understand from your journey, greatest misconception people have about PTSD and trauma recovery. Means people want to go to therapist, but if you say I've gone to a therapist, I've gone to a counselor, you know, people look at it differently. And if you say I've gone to a doctor, people are sympathetic towards you. I want to understand this part as well as the misconception about trauma in terms of recovery and all that stuff. Help us understand through how did you look at how people looked at your journey. How do you want people to look at this journey of others? In these times when people know so many things about all this.
Yeah. Um, People have a lot of different ideas about trauma and about difficult parts of their lives, and a lot of people go through traumatic experiences, and most people have something in their life that was traumatic. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to become post-traumatic stress disorder. That has a specific set of criteria, um, being that you're either re-experiencing or having flashbacks, that you're doing a lot of things to avoid the feelings altogether. Um, but any kind of trauma that you're that you're that's affecting your life is something that would be good to learn how to talk about and to learn how to get help for. There's a lot of information out there. One of the top books right now is the Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Um, and he explains a lot about how trauma really affects us. But I think with PTSD, what a lot of victims of sexual assault and rape have found is that it really does help to seek therapy and to learn about how it is that you really felt. I went through a long period of shock when I first started talking about it, because I put the whole situation away so quickly that I don't think I ever experienced shock for very long, because it was such an uncomfortable feeling when it happened. And so when I started to talk about it in therapy, all the shock came back. But I think my biggest takeaway from what therapy does is I remember thinking when I was in therapy, oh, this is how we're supposed to be. We're not supposed to do it all on our own. We're supposed to reach out to other people. We're supposed to connect with other people, because we live in community. We don't live in isolation. And I had always been handling the really difficult stuff in isolation. I would just try and figure it out for myself. I would have nobody's perspective but my own, and would just keep ruminating on that until I finally would put it away and stop. But that wasn't helping me to overcome and grow with those difficult situations. I was shoving them away instead of growing. And I realized in therapy that that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to connect with other people, to share and be vulnerable, and that's what helps us grow. And that's hard. That's hard to be vulnerable, to talk about hard things, to some of the difficulties that you asked about PTSD and what it's really like, for sexual assault and rape especially, but I think it's not just that. People beat themselves up. I mean, when we're not getting other people's perspectives and we're just living with ourselves, we've got a lot of negative self-talk, we're beating ourselves up. It makes us ashamed of how we responded, and then we definitely don't want to talk about it because we don't like talking about things that are embarrassing or make us ashamed. And the longer that goes on, the more difficult it is to talk about. And what was really enlightening when I finally started talking in therapy, and I finally started talking a little bit to people that I loved, is that the shame that I was feeling was mine alone. Like people couldn't believe that I felt ashamed or humiliated, because because the only reason I was feeling that is I was beating myself up for no reason. I think that was the big surprise, is that there was really no reason why I was doing that. I hadn't done anything. And when people would finally say it in a way that I was able to hear it, I would realize that I was just being human, that I hadn't done anything incorrectly or outrageously or anything to beat myself up about. And that's a big message for people, that if you're able to be vulnerable to others, you can be softer with yourself.
Absolutely, absolutely. If you can be vulnerable with others, you can be softer on yourself. Wonderful thought there. And that brings me to your book, Braving Therapy. It's your first book. Tell us, what inspired you to write this book? People go through their problems, solve it, and want to have a normal life. Not everyone writes a book. Why did you want to write a book? What was your inspiration?
Um, I had always wanted to write, but a lot of people always want to write. But fortunately, somebody showed me how to actually lay out a book, and this was the story that I really felt was important to tell. And it's because there was a lot of learning there. There was a lot. It was 5 years of really understanding how change happens, looking at how to move forward, seeing the positive in life instead of focusing on more of the resentments and things that you would like to see changed. And that was big revelation. And I really felt like I had a message. I felt like as a counselor, I worked with a lot of young people who had trauma and PTSD and their parents who needed kind of direction on what to do. And I had this information and I felt like I really needed to put it out there for people who needed it. And I also felt that I almost had this revelation about living in gratitude, and I felt like I had a message that needed to go out there. And even though through 5 years of therapy, I finally completed that and was really pretty healthy, but I felt like I wasn't done with this whole difficult situation until I passed on the learning. And so that was the purpose of the book, is it was my passing on my learning.
Right. So why braving therapy? I thought, people who need help will get help. They don't. It looks like, it almost like it's a very barrier. You have to bear with it. Help us understand the title. How should people understand this?
I wrote the book on my own perspective, and so that's what I'll talk about. But I've talked to a lot of people since then, and they all feel pretty much like I did. I'm going to say I consider myself smart and accomplished. And smart and accomplished people often feel like they need to be in charge. They need to handle everything on their own. And so a lot of times when things happen, they don't reach out. And then you have all of this stuff. I had things in my head, in my mind, that I had determined I was never going to talk about. And those are all barriers to therapy. And the shame is a huge barrier. And part of the shame is that you feel like you should be able to handle your own life without having to go and pay somebody to listen to you. That's what it felt like for a long time, is I was paying somebody to finally listen to my problems. But it's not that. It's that what you're doing is seeking expert help to figure out how things have gone and how you can improve. And if you don't ever talk to somebody, you've only got your own perspective, and that's not really doing you any good if you get to a point where you're even thinking about therapy. If you're thinking about maybe it would be helpful to talk to somebody else, it would be helpful to talk to somebody else. And if it's uncomfortable, it's probably exactly what you should be talking about, because that's the stuff you're hiding from.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Linda. So, who is this book of yours for? Is it for uh, general people, or is it who have some issue with themselves, facing tough times?
The people I wrote it for were the people who had an issue. So my intention, the person that I was talking to, was I wrote it as an explanation of how you get there and what therapy is like and what is change like, and then how a healthy life looks afterwards. So that is the journey of my book. What I've discovered in people who have read it since then is that most everyone knows someone who has had a traumatic event, and they've talked about how it's helped them understand what's going on with those people. But it's also been really, really helpful. People have connected with it who just struggle with that inner dialogue of keeping things to themselves and not sharing things, and the rumination of I screwed up and I should know better and I should do it better next time. And people who who struggle some with depression or anxiety. I've had a lot of people write to me and talk about how it really explained all of those thoughts that were going on in their head. I had one just really lovely she was a trauma nurse, who said, I've always felt like I put out this perfect, like this view of myself that I have it all covered. I've got everything handled. And I work in a really difficult situation, and then I go out and I hike and I just bury everything and I just move on. And if anybody did ask me, which I wish people would ask me how I'm doing, but I want to say I'm doing just fine because I can handle everything. She said, I never thought about the fact that I should be vulnerable and should actually talk about this stuff. And the idea of seeking therapy had never really crossed my mind, she said, but I really think I need it. And so having people just generally talk about life situations and tough things, tough times they go through, and the fact that it didn't occur to them what sharing that information could do for them has been just really heartwarming for me, because it's not exactly who I wrote the book for, but people are connecting with it.
Absolutely. So, in a nutshell, what is it that you have got into this in this book? What have you discussed? How have you talked about solutions, people? Tell us a bit more from that aspect.
Okay. After the initial setup, well, all right. In the very introduction, I talk about kind of getting over yourself and really stepping into the arena of doing hard things. And I have read some of Dr. Brene Brown's writing, and one of the things that she said that really resonated, she talks about vulnerability and about being vulnerable and how brave you have to be vulnerable. And she said, every day I wake up and I say to myself, I'm going to choose courage over comfort. And that's become my mantra. And as I've said that in the front of the book, a lot of other people have said that's been really helpful. So I tell my story and just how I became a barrier, because I think that a lot of people resonate with that, how they end up just shoving things away. But I explain in really layman's terms, because that's who I am as a layman, about how we store traumatic memory and what PTSD is, what post-traumatic stress disorder is. And then I talk about seeking therapy, how I went about finding a therapist, what all of the obstacles, my own objections were, and overcoming those to actually find a good therapist. And I wrote about my whole 5-year therapy journey and about the changes, how our perspective changes, and how you go kind of 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And a lot of the things that I did to help me in therapy, I journaled a lot about it. That was the first place I really started being honest about my emotions, was with myself in my journals. And I talk about trust, and I talk about really dealing when things got really hard. I got very depressed, to the point where it was scary for quite a while. I had depression and anxiety and suicidal ideation. And so I write about all of that. I write about medications and what it's like to be on the medication journey, because it's not just taking something and being better. It's experimenting with what works for you. And it's frustrating. And I talk about finally dealing with the things that I was most ashamed of, and how when I finally was vulnerable about the things I was most ashamed of is when I got better. And so the bulk of the book is the journey. It's about how change happens and what it's like to be in therapy. And I had a psychiatrist read the book and say that he thought it was a great book for therapists to read, to really hear the inside workings of a patient's mind, what was going on with them. My therapist, I gave him the book after I finished it, 20, 25 years down the road, because I just wanted to make sure I had represented him correctly. And I think he was probably surprised at the stuff that was going on in my head all those times I wasn't talking in therapy. But that's the crux of the book. And the last part of the book is what it's like to live in a healthy, what it's like to live a healthy life, and the way I maintain that now. And I talk about gratitude at the end of the book a lot, because it kind of hit me over the head one day that I was just really appreciating the little things in life, the sunshine and the water, and not looking for more. I was just appreciating my life finally. And I talk about that and about living in gratitude instead of in resentment.
Absolutely. There's much to learn about life, learn about all these things from you, Linda. And I'm sure a lot of people would want to connect with you, learn more about your journey, learn more about your book, get hold of your book. What's the best way for them to do so?
Well, it's available. It can be ordered or purchased at any bookstore. It's a course on Amazon. It is on Kindle. You can reach it on Kindle. And I have a website, Knipe.com. And I'm also on Facebook under L.Knipe. And people can connect with me that way.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much, AJ.